13,000 people were killed, including 3,000 civilians, when Russia's proxy forces first invaded eastern Ukraine's Donbass region in 2014. More than 100,000 Russian troops are again massing on Ukraine's border right now for a potential invasion that would start the first state-on-state war in Europe since the mid-last century. But this time, tens if not hundreds of thousands could be killed. Russia has repeatedly stated it has no plans to attack Ukraine, so it does rather beg the question, why is it there? Joining us now is Vadym Prystaiko, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK and the country's former foreign minister. Mr. Ambassador, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us and coming in as well. It's wonderful to have a guest in the studio.
Thank you.
First of all, let me ask you, how likely do you believe another Russian invasion is right now, and therefore an all-out war between your two countries?
It is very likely, unfortunately. We don't want to call it, wolves are wolves. But there we're coming all these 7+ years. It's not new to us. For many people in Europe, this is something unthinkable, but we lived through it. And thank you for reminding people of the losses we already had all over these times of the war.
How much of a fight would your government, your troops be able to put up against Russia's military might? I mean, there are 106,000 Russian troops, heavily armoured, with a lot of armour on that board now. I mean, you put up a fight, but it would be over pretty quickly, wouldn't it?
Hopefully not. First of all, we do believe that there is still room for diplomatic resolution. We don't know what would be the resolution as of now, but we see that many sides are trying their best, including the UK and our American partners. But if it happens, and hopefully not, but if it happens, the 100,000 is still not enough, to endanger the whole Ukraine. This is biggest by territory nation with 40+ million people and almost 250,000 people standing right now with rifles, plus 500 more veterans and rest of Ukrainians who would like to fight for their independence, just survival, as simple as that.
What do you mean by the rest of Ukrainians? You'd see a mass mobilization wanting to join up and fight, would you?
7 years ago, Ukrainians came as volunteers, mostly. Some Russians were criticized that this is Nazis, volunteers and everything. Yes, volunteers, because we almost had no army at that time. We started with 30 years ago when Soviet Union collapsed, with 1 million people with rifles. And then we were going down as a peaceful nation. Army was not a priority for us. Now we have to rebuild it.
Now, the United Kingdom is supplying anti-tank missiles to your government. 2,000 have been flown from the UK to Ukraine so far. Why are those in particular so important to you?
This is a good start as military equipment by itself, especially when it can be used in the city fights, in the town fights, where we expect if they come, they will go. Ukraine is populated nation. It's not just steppes, as some might think. But even more important that these actions are actually opening up the doors for everybody else. Since recently, there are no many nations which were openly staying with us and not just providing the political concern or deep concern, but actually doing something meaningful.
Well, we'll get on to those other nations, but we only started flying you anti-tank missiles this week. I mean, this is very, very late in the day to have any sort of deterrent effect on the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin's thinking, isn't it?
I believe the deterrent effect is still with us because they're still in their own territory, messing up, probably, hopefully, just trying to threaten us. And they're threatening. This for Ukrainians is quite threatening to see them just over it. And remember, they were shooting at us and sending rockets over all these years from their own territory, so that they don't have to cross it, unlike they want to really invade Ukraine, deep inside Ukraine.
But you're quite clear that the Ukrainian armed forces, Ukrainian people, would oppose any Russian invasion belligerently. And you mentioned street-to-street fighting, anti-tank missiles going down high streets. That's a likelihood.
Very, very likely. We don't want to see this, Chechnya style, but because we remember these pictures, how Russia treated their own people, why wouldn't be surprised that it would come for somebody else like Ukrainians?
Let me ask you what you think Vladimir Putin is really trying to achieve with this whole crisis. I mean, there are several options, aren't there? There is a mass invasion, conquering and subordination of Ukraine. Now, you say 100,000 troops probably won't do that. Ukraine's a big country. It's the size of France. 100,000 troops.
Bigger.
Bigger than France.
Yep.
I stand corrected. So 100,000 troops isn't going to do that. There's another argument that he's trying to establish a land corridor to Crimea, which is, of course, under Russian occupation at the moment, still part of Ukraine. Or there's another argument altogether, which is this is just some great bluff to establish leverage for something else altogether, perhaps to withdraw NATO troops from some communist countries that Sergei Lavrov asked for on Friday. What do you think Vladimir Putin is trying to achieve?
Some people would argue that this 100 years of anniversary of formal creation of Soviet Union is so dear to Putin. So he would come with an idea to get the Soviet Union back. Remember, in Munich, he told once that was the worst geopolitical catastrophe, the collapse of Soviet Union. Unfortunately, I believe that he still lives in the same mode. This is one possibility. Another one, actually, to subdue one of those rebellious ones like Ukraine. And we are the biggest out of all Soviet Union. Look at what happened to Belarus and Kazakhstan recently. Three of us, we had nuclear weapons on our territory. Three of us decided to give it back under the promise to be defended. And both of them are already in the pocket of Putin. We are the last prize in this line.
You generally think he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, recreate all those border territories, that grand empire stretching deep into Eastern Europe.
That's what he had, and he was mentioning it on many, many, many occasions.
Okay, now look, he obviously has an issue with you too. Now, he says Ukraine, which did used to be part of the Soviet Union, since the Soviet Union's breakup, it sort of existed almost as a buffer state between NATO countries and the Russian Federation. He is incredibly concerned about Ukraine's future ambitions, especially NATO membership. Does Ukraine want to join NATO?
We do want to join NATO, and we don't understand why you have to fight us to prove the point that NATO is not your best friend. I mean, this is a strange way of telling NATO, just invading some other ones who is not a part of it, who can defend itself. But I also believe that our existence is the threat for him, but not because of NATO tanks and rockets, but because we are showing the example to his own people that actually, guys, you can live same life as every European is living, and we are almost half of Russian population. So it's not a joke. Russians will look at a thing. Can we also be living this way, democratic, tolerant, the way the Ukrainians live?
But just playing devil's advocate, looking at it from a Russian perspective, if you have a NATO country, Ukraine, if you join, right up against the Russian Federation's border, you'll have the vast masses of potential NATO armies, NATO air forces, right up against Russia. And they would feel, perhaps understandably, threatened by that.
First of all, let me say how we feel right now. We're already threatened. We are not a part of it. We are not threatening him anymore, but we're already threatened by him just because we are as we are. But let's ask ourselves other question. Why all the nations, part of Soviet Union, like Baltic states, like us, and everybody around us in Warsaw Pact, Poles and Czechs, Slovaks, everybody, why all of them are trying to escape and flee under the umbrella of NATO? What is so wrong with Russia itself that everybody, all the friends, previous friends, are trying to get cover under somebody else's umbrella, security umbrella? Maybe because of the Russians.
Well, it could be so. But what I'm saying is, if Ukraine were to promise, and look, this is not my belief, this is what the Russians are asking for. If Ukraine were to just promise to be a neutral country like Switzerland or Finland, for example, and never joining up any alliance and just simply exist there as a buffer state, you may not have as much trouble with Russia.
Promise. I don't believe in Russian promises. We've had so many documents signed by them on the paper. It's not us who said that the signature of Russian doesn't work as the paper it's been written on. The problem is with them that we agreed with them that first of all we gave up the weapons, they will defend us. Then we had agreement with them when we divorced peacefully that we will live in our own lands peacefully. And that again didn't happen. Then by 2017 they had to withdraw their forces from Crimea. That was written in our treaty with them. Again they stayed there. So they broke so many agreements before. I don't understand how this particular one, any paper we will sign with them, will work.
Let's talk about other countries' reactions to Russian aggression. Now, Britain, as we've discussed, is arming Ukraine as quickly as we can. There's a fascinating flight path mapped out on Twitter of RAF Hercules transporters going backwards and forwards all week long. Dozens of flights backwards and forwards from the UK to Ukraine with those anti-tank missiles on board. But if you look at their flight path, they fly to Germany. They then have to go north, fly all around the Denmark coastline and down again, because the Germans do not allow the RAF to overfly its territory to deliver arms to Ukraine. Germany's also blocked Estonia from giving military arms to Ukraine because those arms were initially made in Germany. What do you think Berlin's actions says to Moscow?
I believe the Germans still somehow in the mode of trying to befriend Russians, or at least be one of those nations who are most friendly to them in Europe. I don't know, it's because they're buying most of the Russian gas, or they like the fur coats or something else from Russia. I also understand that they have historical ideas of their, the guilt towards Russians, missing that actually they have guilt toward everybody in the Soviet Union. And Ukraine was occupied. And so many Ukrainians were killed in the war, not just Russians themselves. All of this, coming up probably to the position we're observing right now. We're very unhappy, and especially these words being uttered by the Vice Admiral, the guy who was running the Navy, German, that we will never become an... we understand how difficult situation with Ukraine and NATO, but we don't have to be, reminded each and every second that, guys, you are on your own and nobody's coming to help you. Imagine the message Ukrainians are getting.
Yeah, this is the head of the German Navy forced to resign after saying that Vladimir Putin deserves respect and Crimea would never return back to Ukraine. Now, you base a considerably different German response to Russia on German guilt because of the Second World War.
Some of them still believe it, that because of this guilt, and again the wounds, the catastrophe that Russians brought, but they're always missing the point. Who are those Russians? By the way, the guy who was raising flag over the Reichstag was Georgian. Next to him was Ukrainian. It just happened that Germans are missing the picture, calling all of us Russians. Now we're all in our own national homes, and we deserve also to be remembered for the losses we had and for the participation in the war. We, by the way, were on this side of the war, not Germans.
What would you like Germany to do instead?
I would like Germans at least to stay strong. If they decided for their own internal reason not to help us, at least I don't want them to help Russians by this quite strange statements.
Okay, it's not just arms though. It's NATO's response and Europe's response as well. It's all fairly divided. So you look at President Biden's gaffe last week, which your president was very critical of, in which he seems to suggest that a small incursion into Ukraine or another small incursion would be tolerated. France wants its own treaty with Moscow. And then we've seen German response and the resignation of the head of the German Navy now. It's fairly messy, isn't it? And does that messiness in response help Moscow?
I believe so, and we have to recognize that Russians are doing quite well in making, this all of these things, wedging this discord among the nations of NATO. What's actually interesting here that Russians are calling NATO an aggressive bloc just among themselves, and I don't see much of aggressiveness in the recent response from NATO.
You don't see enough aggressiveness. Would you like to see NATO being a little bit more aggressive in its deterrent?
Exactly. The way Russians describe it is supposed to be an evil and aggressive bloc. And look at them. They are trying all the best they can diplomatically to resolve it. Nobody's preparing their forces. They are not moving even towards their own borders right now, still believing in the peaceful diplomatic resolution. And believe me, Ukrainians would love the first ones to have it because we don't want to be killed and don't want to fight. But if we have any other options, we will take it.
Right. So you're disappointed, are you? The people of Ukraine disappointed in NATO?
I should be more diplomatic in stating that I am disappointed, but actually I am.
You are. Let me ask you about Nord Stream 2. This is, of course, the gas pipeline. There's already Nord Stream, which is the pipeline going through Ukraine into the West, into Western Europe. Nord Stream 2 is the one that comes down the Baltic Sea. Now it's largely controlled by Germany. We heard Dominic Raab this morning saying Nord Stream 2 should not go ahead at all if Russia invades Ukraine again. Do you think the West, Britain and Germany should be saying Nord Stream 2 shouldn't be happening full stop? Because, of course, that allows Russia to divert its gas supply. It wouldn't have to go through Ukraine, so it can really do whatever it wants in Ukraine. You lose your leverage from having that pipeline on your territory.
And it's not just leverage, it's actually part of security arrangements because Ukraine, we believe, was not invaded by Russians for many, many of these years because the pipeline was in our land. Now when we have physically actually freed themselves from this pipeline and now they have this another route around our territory, around Poland, around the most of the Europe, this is actually untying their hands in coming to us. It's not coincidence why both of these events happened at the same time. And I do believe that we did not need this pipeline in the first place because Ukraine pipelines is more than adequate to provide as much gas as necessary through our pipelines and our storage facilities, which are the biggest in Europe.
Now, you can see perhaps the Germans' reluctance to enter into a full-blown, if not military match, and certainly shouting match and sanctions, because the first thing, of course, if Germany and other European NATO countries did impose biting banking sanctions, for example, on Russia, cut them out of the international SWIFT banking system, then Russia would turn off that gas. And you would see in January, much of Europe really struggle to heat their homes. You'd have an incredible crisis. So that gas pipeline that's going through your country, has, to use a British expression, got much of Europe by the short and curlies.
You know, your government and governments were quite reasonably trying to get independence from the sources of energy supply. And you have almost, couple of percent in your pipelines, actually molecules from Russian gas. Germans were not that lucky or not that wise to have to have sort of independence from Russia. We had it. We went through it. We were the biggest buyer of Russian gas. We're totally connected to it. Even our corruption rooted from this Russian gas coming from very low price. And was the source of all our problems. We went through it. We sort of found the way to how to live without it. And we are quite happy that we are not, and our political decisions are not dictated anymore by Russian gas and Russian prices.
But that's great. You've thought ahead. Unfortunately, other European
we
countries...
did not.
Well,
we're suffering right now because of it.
Yes, okay, well, that's a better way of putting it. But other European countries haven't. What you're effectively saying to Germany, to Italy, to countries that really value Russian gas is put up with it, not having it anymore, go cold, see your economies crash, simply to stand up for us.
No, absolutely not. What I'm telling them, that guys, if you want to survive the way we do, and who told you that they won't come for you? Because you are in NATO? I don't feel that Baltic republics who are in NATO feel safe because they're already in the alliance. They still believe that Russia poses a threat. Even bigger part like Poland, they feel they are threatened by this. So Italy might believe that they are too far, or I don't know what, too strong. I don't think so. If we are feeding the Russian bear, it will get stronger, and one day it will come against NATO as well.
Mr. Ambassador, hello. You've said you're disappointed in NATO's response so far. Is there more the British government specifically can and should be doing right now?
I believe that among NATO nations, all equals and we understand how it works, but at the same time, some nations have a lead. And UK is one of those nations which is actually taking the lead. I can tell you professionally, I was ambassador of Ukraine to NATO. I've seen it not just once. So some nations like Canada, UK, Poland, these nations do understand what is happening. And they try not to shut their eyes, but actually act upon it. UK is one of those.
And when you say act, what does that look like? What should people be looking for our government to be doing?
For example, you've been training our people, 25,000 soldiers been already trained, on top of the equipment you provided, on top of our officers been actually trained as cadets here in the schools. This is future of Ukrainian Navy, Army and everything, the future Ukrainian generals, which are now building up the friendship. And what your nation is successfully doing is building up the friendship with one of the big powers, future powers in Europe, on other side of European continent, which is Ukraine.
Do you accept, though, that if Putin does do this thing and does invade, there is not very much that Britain can do about it?
Frankly, I still believe that there is a possibility. If Putin sees that there is a united position of all Europeans, especially the stronger one, and NATO, he might reconsider it. He's not suicidal type. He wants to get something, but doesn't mean that he will lose the power. And their structure is very different from what you have. There is no political debate, and very much everything is connected to his emotional decision, which might be taken any second. This is the problem. But at the same time, it allows us to appeal to his own, feeling of the threat or his greatness. Maybe he wants to come in the history books as a gatherer of Soviet Union or Russia Empire, whatever he has in his mind.
Do you fear you're going to be abandoned by NATO when it really matters?
We are not a member of family. We understand it. I don't want to be reminded by German generals each and every minute of it, but we are realistic. We understand that. Unfortunately, it's not because we were not trying. We were trying for many, many years. 2008, NATO told us that we will become members of NATO. And by the way, they wanted their ministers of foreign affairs assess how Ukraine is ready for membership action plan. It was 2008. Now it's 2022. We have not assessed yet if are we ready for membership action plan and not. If you wanted to prove Russians that NATO actually go in their own course, they have to show Ukrainians that they have to go what NATO wants, not what Russia wants.
Do you think that in the end, Putin will pull back from the brink?
It is still possible. It's not enough. The 100,000 which we described, this is dangerous, but not enough for us really to give up. And been frank, 7 years they were trying different tactics, and we still keep the same course as we told, and not because of him, because of our own choice, our own people. We have EU and NATO, you must be laughing, in our own constitution.
Vadym Prystaiko, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, some extremely strong feelings from you, which we're very grateful to hear. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you.